On today's episode, we're speaking with Tom Perry. Tom is the founder of Engaged Pursuit, and we're going to be diving deep into the professional dashboard. It's a tool that Tom and his team use as the foundation to build the professional story.
This is The Career Cue, the podcast focused on helping you navigate the signals in your career to keep you growing and moving forward in business and in life. Here's today's host, Stacey Harris.
So welcome back, Tom. It's so great to see you again.
It's great to see you as well.
It's always fun to have you in the studio. Let's actually refresh our listeners' memories on what is the professional dashboard and why is it so valuable?
So the professional dashboard is a product of Engaged Pursuit that really is the foundation for the professional story. So instead of just coming up with a random mix of words and statements in the creation of the professional story, I found that it's really important to have a recipe for the creation of that professional story. So that's really what the dashboard is. It is a recipe in the creation of that professional story.
So taking all of the ingredients and baking something beautiful.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's actually take our listeners back a little bit to how the professional dashboard came about, because you actually have obviously a very personal connection with that.
I do, and it was something that I created based on my professional experience. And it was really a moment where I was not engaged in corporate life, and I knew something was funky, and I didn't have really any way to measure or to identify what was funky, or what was wrong. And I knew I felt weird, and I was starting to exhibit some disengaged behaviors, and I had a hard time identifying what the problem was, besides just not feeling great on Monday morning and Tuesday morning and Wednesday morning. So there was a gap where I didn't have a resource to really identify where that feeling was coming from. And that lack of information, really, because I am a data guy. I do like quantifiable and qualitative information. I needed to know where the bad feelings were coming from. So that's really where why I created this dashboard, to help to identify what could be causing some disengagement for me professionally.
So it sounds like you had to go through a process, and perhaps you weren't able to find that process out there and already in existence, and that you actually took it upon yourself, like a true entrepreneur.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there were some things that I found. They have different resources like Strength Finders or Myers-Briggs, and kind of help you identify who you are professionally, but it was just kind of limited. There was really no resource that was out there that I found that really looked at the entire professional experience and the entire professional mindset. And I do think that this dashboard that I created for Engaged Pursuit clients really addresses a lot of the facets of your employee experience, not just in your job every day, but it really allows you to understand what kinds of jobs you should be looking for in the future and what kinds of companies are interesting to you. That just helps to create more opportunity, I think, for every individual. So that roadmap, that recipe, whatever you want to call it, at a broader professional experience perspective, just didn't really exist. And when I sat down and created it, and that took quite a bit of time and conversation and research and scribbling on napkins, all that stuff, it really created that aha moment for me. Where I was able to say, yes, that is the issue that I'm experiencing. That is the problem. It isn't necessarily me 100%. And it really validated the fact that a change needed to happen and a different path needed to occur.
And probably also the result of that were actions that you were able to take once you identified what that was.
Yeah. So for me, for my specific example, that really pushed me into a different experience was one around leadership and your direct manager. So for me, in my previous experience, we were always under reorg changes. So things were always happening in regards to team movements and different priorities. And because of that, there were lots of bosses and managers that were part of my professional experience. And I realized through the professional dashboard that the boss that I was working with then did not share the values that I have. And that those were professional values and personal values too. And that was a big aha moment for me where I was able to say, because of the dashboard, hey, this is one of the biggest reasons why I think that I'm unhappy. This is the biggest component that I'm finding a weird experience. And that was really eye-opening for me. The other element that I looked at really closely was around organizational state. So I mentioned in previous podcasts that I am a builder, someone who likes to create. And so when I moved in, because of a reorg, into an organization that was in more of a steady state mode, more of just business as usual mode, that to me also created disengagement and a difficult situation for me to remedy, because I wasn't doing the things that I love doing, which is building and whiteboarding and discussing different things. So when that changed as well, in addition to the boss situation, I realized that, hey, I've got to make a change. So creating the dashboard was super valuable for me personally and professionally now, because I'm doing it, for my professional future. Was really wonderful. And then it also led to my professional story. It allowed me to create clarity around my identification that I am a coach, as I mentioned in other podcasts, that I am someone who does like to help others or enable others to achieve success. So it did create a lot of light bulbs
That's awesome.
that went off. Yeah,
that's awesome. And identifying a gap and being the one that takes action on that, right, and tries to fill that gap and bring productivity and service to others, because if we can change the life of just one person, I feel like we've achieved so much. So that's fantastic. So let's actually talk about who creates that dashboard. You obviously did your own, and so is it something that if you want one created, you actually have to do it yourself?
And I think that's the best. I think that's the best way to do it. I think you have to do it from your perspective and from your experiences. I think that's the only way to really make this personable and really make it meaningful to you is if you create it. Now, of course, I do like to add my 2 cents in for my clients, and I do think that pushing people in certain directions based on our conversations is important. But I would say 95% is self-driven and, again, based on your experiences. And I also like to have it be, in some regards, forward-looking. So there are elements that are, what have I done well in the past and where have I been most successful? But there are elements to the story, too, that are more forward-looking that I do think is important to put that hat on, especially for folks who feel stuck and don't really know what the future is. I think just talking about potential and helping clients think about different ways to approach the future is also an important part of the dashboard as well. The other thing I'll mention too is the dashboard, while it is really created from the individual and conversations either with themselves or with me, it does also incorporate other perspectives too, which I think is important. So there are elements of the dashboard that are around your strengths from a previous coworker's perspective, for example, or from a best friend. So there are pieces where we will work together to identify, what are you good at, but what would others say that you're good at as well. So there's a couple areas of that take a little bit of a different perspective outside of just your own feeling.
Well, because it's sometimes easier for other people to see from the outside in.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you get too much in your own head,
Yeah.
you can get stuck there. So sometimes it's great to be able to get, and both in a what are your strengths, but what are some areas of improvement to consider, right? Or bubbling to the surface, hey, you don't give yourself enough credit for this particular task or skill set. So that's fantastic. Let's actually dive into some of the elements.
Yeah.
I'm going to love this part because breaking it down for people, is I think key so they can understand the different stages, so they can compartmentalize them. Because I think it can be or can seem overwhelming. So to break it down, I think is going to be really helpful. So what's the first step?
So to give you an overview, there are 6 steps in the professional dashboard, again, which is the foundation to the professional story. And I do like to look at it like a recipe. I mean, I know that's kind of corny, but
I love it.
I do think that it does. The culmination of all of these 6 ingredients does create something beautiful. And I do think it is something that people can do in chunks of time. Like it doesn't need to all be super dedicated. It doesn't need to take a long period of time. You can do this, at night or in the car. It doesn't necessarily need to be all at one area. So the first area of focus for me, the first ingredient, is really all around organizational state. So I talked about that being a big driver for me and an area where I was finding that I was not doing my best work because I moved into a different organizational state. But this is really a lens of how an organization is operating. And I think that there are about 6 or so different types of organizational states that most professionals will see. And those are really from kind of infancy, startup into more mature organizational states. So the first one that I like to look at is what I call the starter stage. So this is a stage of development where people are all hands on deck and they are really moving quickly and they might have fewer numbers because it's a newer company. And it has that startup kind of feel to it. Maybe it's, everyone's just moving quickly. It has that vibe to it that I think there are certain people who are attracted to those kinds of organizational states. I am attracted to those kinds of organizational states, even as a small business owner, as an entrepreneur. I am a starter kind of a guy. And so I think, again, there are people who do well in those kinds of organizations. It is a little bit more card table, garage, 1 or 2 kind of people usually. But, you can have a starter kind of person in a mid-sized company as well. It doesn't have to just be, somebody in a garage and a card table. Then we move into the next one is what I call the builder stage. So this is a little bit more developed than the card table. Maybe you've got an office and there are more people around. There has been some success. And this is all about growth. So building organizational models, staffing people to be successful, modeling, different ways to approach customers if that's your business, thinking about scale, those kinds of things. This is where, again, I think I operate really well in the creation of organizations and bringing the right people in is what I would consider a builder type of a person. Then there's the optimizer. So that's moving, again, from left to right. The optimizer is someone who loves to make organizations great from existing experiences. So they are looking at development of people, maybe who have been around for a while. They want to optimize the performance of individual groups. They're trying to make things efficient. Again, they're trying to scale possibly certain pieces. So maybe there's multiple business units or different things going on, and they really have the eye to hone in on what's working and what maybe isn't working. They're just able to optimize that professional experience. Then there's the runner. So this is the zone where I'm not so hot. This is what I call the steady Eddie, the performance review person, the business reporting, process policies. They want consistency, throughout the experience. So there are people who really love that stuff. They come in, business managers, to name one type of person, they are good at reporting on how things are going. And that is an important piece of the corporate pie. Then as we're starting to go down on organizational states, kind of the other side of the spectrum, there's what I call the changer. So this is the other organizational state where things are about to be shaken up. Maybe there's someone who is coming in to close a certain business unit, or they're moving resources to other initiatives, whatever. This is what is really important for people to have great communication skills. Maybe they need to be a tough guy or gal to deliver messages. They need to be thinking big picture because there's change going on within an organization, and some people are really good at that. And finally, there's the closer. And this is possibly an organizational state that some consultants, for example, could be really good at, where they're having to make tough decisions. There's been maybe layoffs, and they have to work with human resources and public relations. There are people who are good at that as well. So those 6 really kind of from the infancy all the way down to maybe closing a business unit, I think people can identify and think about like, oh, I've been in those kinds of experiences and I really relate to one or two of those. And what we like to do with the dashboard then is to identify, okay, what are the 2 or 3 that you really resonate with? And let's go after those. Like let's look at job descriptions. If you're a builder, for example, like me, let's go after job descriptions that say, building an organization from scratch, or we're making big change. You'll see that in the job description. You're not going to go after roles or job descriptions that read, looking for business reporting or need someone to crunch data.
Right.
Like that's just not going to be you. And so let's avoid that altogether.
Don't spend time on that if you have already identified that perhaps that's not the organizational state that you most thrive in. Yeah, that's great.
So that's the first one.
Yeah.
The second one is all around your strengths. And we've talked about this quite a bit in previous recordings, but this is a really important piece of the puzzle, I think. Really important ingredient. I got to keep with my themes here. But this simply is, what are you good at? So I think this is something people can, go a variety of different ways. They can look at it from where have you received the best feedback? Maybe where was your best performance review? Like what were you doing? But then you can also look at it from a competency perspective. So if you're not sure where to start with strengths, if it just seems overwhelming to you in the creation of this, I like to look at it from a competency perspective. So are you good at communication, or are you really organized, or maybe you have really great client focus, or maybe you are a really good program manager or a salesperson. Like I think that's also part of the strengths conversation as well. And in this bucket, in this ingredient, I do like to look at this from a coworker's perspective, from your boss's perspective, and from your best friend's perspective. So I have clients who, you can ask them like, what are my strengths? Or you could assume, or you could make up some guesses, I guess, around what you think they would say on your behalf.
So, and is a strength, could it also be considered something that you've received them or feel the most fulfilled in doing? I think of in my career some of the things that would be kind of fall under the bucket of success, but there are times where I'm like, the things that happened before or after that where I had the most fun. So the success was identified by the result, but the journey on getting there was maybe not as quantifiable as the result, but it was the journey that was actually the most fulfilling for me because it got me to the end result.
I am a fan of the journey and where are you having the most fun? And that's kind of a hard word to use, fun, because it does seem kind of basic and juvenile, I guess. But I do think that's the lens I would have that's what I recommend clients do is where were you feeling the most energy? Like where were you excited to go into work? What were you doing? Were you communicating? Were you talking to clients? Were you driving a certain product revision, whatever? That's the pivot, and that's the lens I think is good to look at for strengths.
Yeah. So making sure that while you are reviewing your strengths, that you are also considering the times that you felt most good about what you were doing too. Yeah. Well, then I think that leads into the values, right? Because if you're not in alignment with either your manager's values or your organizational the values at the organizational level, there's going to be a huge disconnect there too.
And that is the third element, and probably the most squishy, I would say, where you really need to define for yourself and for the role, the company, and your boss. So those are the four elements that I like to identify in the dashboard. Really, what you want and how you want to operate. So for me, with my new business of Engaged Pursuit, I really looked at things like teamwork and gratitude and honesty and frugality and being humble and sincere with people and my clients. So for me, that is how I want to operate, and I hope that my company operates like that. And I think it's important for people to go through that exercise both at a micro level with yourself and your boss. And I think the boss, as I said before, is this really important to look at, but also the macro level with the role and the organization as well. So another example for me personally, I do really value community service and being a presence in the community. And so I traditionally looked at companies that were big in volunteering and giving back to the community either financially or through whatever. And organizations that don't have a presence here in Seattle or don't give back is not, cool to me. So I don't want to really work there. And that's again important, I think, to consider.
Yeah. And because that's a personal value that bleeds over into professional, and it allows for you to find that connection with your personal self and your professional self as well. So let's talk about environment, the fourth one. What does it mean by environment?
So I think there's a couple elements to that. One is the physical environment that is important to success, in my opinion. And that to me is that's a couple of elements to that. One is the physical environment of the office. So lots of companies are moving to more of a open experience and don't use offices as much as in the past. And there are other companies who are continuing to use offices as their ways to get employees to do work. So I think there's considerations around that folks should think about. Are you better in cube environments or office environments? Or most people say, I don't care. They can do whatever. And that's also good to know, I think. And I think it also involves the type of environment outside of the office too. So do you want to have a city environment or a suburb environment? And I think that it's really good to think about the after work experience and just kind of what do you want to have around you professionally as a source of inspiration and as a source of, possibly de-stressing. I think it's important to think about city. Do you want to be bustling and going to Starbucks downstairs in the lobby and taking a train into work? Or do you want to have a set campus, kind of environment where you are outside of the city and you're contained? There are people who like that too because it's kind of safe and it's there's no difficulty in getting to work. It just kind of is. So I think those are the couple big elements around environment that I think are important to consider. And then there's the people piece too. So do you want to work around extroverts or introverts. That's one big consideration. I also think there's an element of working from home versus in the office. So these are things that you can ask yourself and potentially employers around philosophies in that. And then travel. So does the environment that you're in involve an airplane where you're going to experience different things and be away from family potentially as well? And that also plays into your environment too. So I think it's important to talk about that and to consider those things. For me personally, coming, and being in Seattle, I don't want to do that bridge anymore. I don't want to go across any bridges. I want to take a train into work. And that's the experience that I want. And that falls into the environment umbrella that is really important.
And I would imagine that it's an element that maybe there isn't enough weight put on as far as the thought around what is most important, and whether you package it as a non-negotiable, I don't want to drive across a bridge again, or if it's, well, I'd prefer not to, but for these things, I will make that as a sacrifice. Right. So it's figuring out the priority as it relates to you.
Yeah, and that is super important to think about, because it isn't an all or nothing thing. I mean, hopefully you get most of what you want, but I do think using the dashboard as a way to identify the best case scenario, and then for you, to examine what offers and what the reality is of that, you can then use the dashboard then to say, okay, I'm willing to give up the bridge commute for working from home on Fridays, or wow, this salary is $10,000 more a year, and it requires a bridge commute, so I'm okay with that versus being in the city. So that you can make better judgments, you can make better calls if you use the dashboard in your decision making. But I hope it's perfect most of the time, but I do realize that sometimes you do have to make a decision around stuff like this and say, well, I'm okay with having cubes because this is a really awesome opportunity. Yeah. Well, and it always evolves, right? Because life changes as well. So having the dashboard as almost a working document as well, because if you have it, if you create it and then 2 years from now life changes, you get your marital status changes, you have kids, the kids leave the house, whatever. There's different changes that happen over the course of time that we can try and plan for, but we can't 100% predict. Yeah. So let's quickly talk about the last two, number 5 and 6, business impact. Yeah. So this is the most, I would say, technical. I think that's the right word. Part of the dashboard. This is really the impact that you've made professionally. So I like to look at this with my clients in kind of states of 3. So what are the 3 biggest things that you've done professionally, the biggest impact that you've had? And I think it's important from just a memory perspective just to think about those things and to have them on your forefront as you're considering potential new opportunities. But it's also been a really big confidence builder for clients as well, just to think back and say, wow, I've done some pretty cool things. So for me, you can think about things like people management, experiences, team development. That could be one bucket you look at. You might look at certain customer relationships that you've had that were really successful. It could be the creation of stuff. Maybe you create a new program or you helped a project really get off the ground. There could be marketing messaging that you created. So maybe you launched a product or you created a new video that had great impact for a certain thing. So it doesn't necessarily have to be all about the numbers per se. And I do think it's good to look diverse at those business results as well and think about them from, a people perspective, from a product perspective, from a company perspective, and maybe from the work you're actually, supposed to be doing as well.
That's great. And I would think that would serve as a great exercise even if you're not actively looking for a job, right? Just for you to be able to kind of get back to the core of what you're doing and whether you're spending your time in areas that you want to, and are you getting the impact.
Yeah.
But also reminding yourself like, oh, I did that 18 months ago. So much has happened since then, but I can't forget that I had actually achieved that. That's great. So last but not least, let's talk about opportunities.
So this is where most folks struggle, I think, because they're like, well, I don't really know what I want to do, and I have no idea what the future is going to be like. And I think that's totally fine. I definitely feel like that is something that I myself don't know. Most of us don't know. So I think in creating this final recipe piece, you can look at it from a couple different ways. So for me, I look at this as being possibly new skills that I want to gain in my professional path. So maybe I want to be better at selling stuff, or I want to be a better leader, or I want to be a better product manager. And so those are specific skills that I think you can possibly use as a guide to create some opportunities for you. There's also some strengths that maybe you want to build. So these are competencies. Again, maybe I want to be a better communicator, or I would like to be a better person who deals with ambiguity better. Or maybe I'm somebody who wants to be more agile, and go with the flow and be able to change quickly. So that's another way to look at this as being ways to think about your opportunities. And finally, the experiences that I want to have, maybe life experiences. So maybe I want to work for a small company, or I want to travel more, or maybe I want to go out totally on my own like I'm doing now. So that's another way to think about opportunities in the future. So it doesn't have to be this big overwhelming thing. You can look at it from a skills, from a competencies or strengths perspective, and you can also look at it from a life perspective, and that will get the juices
flowing.
going. Yeah, for sure.
That's great. So those are definitely, and especially when you kind of take them one by one, a great exercise to go through. Obviously, your clients are able to go into a deep dive with you and your team, but certainly something that folks can kind of try as a DIY exercise as well. That's great. We're actually going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're actually going to be talking about using the professional dashboard as a part of your professional story, but the additional steps for you to be able to get to the source of truth.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes at thecareerq.com, where you can also subscribe to the podcast and sign up for our newsletter.
Welcome back. We're talking with Tom Perry, founder of Engaged Pursuit. And today we're digging into the professional dashboard. And we've talked about, Tom, using the professional dashboard as the foundation for your professional story. But let's actually talk about some other areas that you can actually utilize that.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple ways you could look at the dashboard. One is using it in your current situation and really understanding where you are professionally in your current role. And I think that's valuable. That allows folks to really understand if there are elements that are really great and they are able to say, yep, I am doing these things every day. And it also allows people to identify potentially what might not be going so well in their current experience. And I also think it's just really good, as I said earlier, just to write this down and to get it out there. And I think people have to do that when they're in their current experience. Again, to validate where they are and who they are professionally. And I think it's great to use this as a recipe to say, yep, I am on the right track and I am doing what I think I should be doing, and there is value in this particular role, and I'm good. Like this is a good exercise, and now I can really maximize this role because I've written down exactly my roadmap, and this is a really good exercise. On the other side of the coin, I do think that the dashboard can be used really extensively in the job search. So for folks who have identified that they are on that disengaged path and that change needs to happen because they have big elements that are out of sync, they can use the dashboard as a guide really in not only the professional story like we talked about as the foundation, but really in all elements of your journey to find something new. So it comes to play in the job search itself. So as I mentioned before, you look for certain words and job descriptions. You might talk to certain people in your network who are part of organizations that are building stuff or starting stuff or whatever your organizational state is. So it defines and helps you in the work you do around networking and finding opportunities. And then it also really helps you in the job interview stage as well. And this is where I find with my clients, really using the dashboard is beneficial because it does help you to tell, your story, but it also helps to really crisply identify your strengths and what you're looking to do in the future. It could also spark curiosity and thoughts in your head around maybe what you're not so good at, so you can help to answer that question. So it really is a great tool to use in a variety of interview situations as well. And that's really part of the key value statement, I think, of the professional dashboard is the fact that it can be used in so many situations. I also think that it is a really good tool, a really good product to go back to once you're in a role for, let's say, 90 days and validate, and say, I checked all these boxes when I was saying yes to the role, and I used it as my guide to accepting the offer. Now, in reality, in this new world, this new role that I'm in, is this actually happening? Like, am I still leveraging my strengths like I thought, or is my boss still somebody who is good? Those kinds of things. So it can be used as a validation tool as well.
Well, because so much can change in 90 days, let alone 18 months or 3 years. So it's almost like the ability to be able to use it as a checkpoint, right? And whether you, kind of revert to it once a year when you change the batteries in your smoke detector, or time changes or football season starting, you use that as that checkpoint, and so you're not waiting 3 to 5 years before you realize, oh, wait a second, my values don't align, and they haven't aligned from the day I started.
I actually have it on my desk, and I found that to be really valuable. I was never really print out kind of a guy in my previous life. And I found that in this experience, printing off my dashboard and having it on my desk or on your wall is really helpful because you see it every day. And is it a reminder for you to make sure, one, you're living these things professionally, and two, if things do go awry, you have an instant source of going back to something physical and saying, okay, hey, I can actually look at this now and say this is out of whack, or this is something I'm monitoring. It doesn't have to be totally out of whack in order for you to just have a heads up. But I like to have it at my desk and just available.
So let's talk about kind of the evolution of that dashboard. Life happens, life changes, career changes, new bosses, organizational changes. So let's close this out. Talk about the evolution. The evolution of the dashboard, right? Life happens, careers happen, bosses happen. Do you have a recommendation for your clients on how regularly they should revisit it?
It really depends, and I think the best way to revisit this is on a quarterly basis. That's what I do. Formally, every quarter, and that includes just a quick review of all the elements, making sure that it's in line with your life experience and the things that you value at the time. As I said before, I am a fan of having it there on your desk all the time, but I do think having a deep dive once a quarter is good. I also like doing it with somebody and validating some of the elements that require outside perspective, so strengths and those kinds of things I think is important. if there is an event that happens in your professional life, though, a change in an org or a new boss or whatever, I do think in those situations it's better to go back to the dashboard immediately and say, okay, a big change is coming. I've got a new boss. Maybe I've got a new role that I was reorged into. It's important to revisit the dashboard just to make sure you're staying true to yourself and really focusing on what's important to you as those changes start happening to you. Because it really is that roadmap. It really is that recipe for success for you, and being armed with that information as things are happening is
and
really
swirling
important.
around you.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and what we're seeing a lot in the industry right now is a lot of acquisition, right? So if you feel like you're in total sync with your organization, and then they're acquired, right? Like you're moving to a new campus, or you're falling under their brand, but you're not sure if that one aligns with what is true to your heart. That's a great opportunity for that as well. And so I'm a date person. Like if we were to revisit it every quarter, it sounds like every 90 days is a good indicator. So a reminder on your phone, maybe.
Exactly, yeah.
And if you are the kind of person that likes to print it out, perhaps just a quick date in the corner, so you can kind of map to that 90-day cycle.
And I like 90 days because if you do miss it because life happens, it's not going to be this major gap if you then check it after 6 months. So if you had it every 6 months or even every year and you missed it, then you could get in some trouble, I think. So that's why I like the quarterly cadence, just because it's there and it doesn't need to be a big thing. It could be a half-hour conversation or just some alone time going through and checking off where you are, and you can move forward for the next 3 months.
That's awesome. And in 3 months, I like that, every 3 months. So before we really finish out, let's talk about, you've given some great recommendations on some great reads.
Oh, thanks.
So we've got to ask you if you have one more.
I do, yeah. And this is a book that I read earlier this year from a TED Talk speaker, another maybe next time I'll give you a TED Talk to check out.
That'd be great.
But this is one of the most downloaded TED Talks I think ever from Amy Cuddy, and Amy is a beautiful writer and a beautiful speaker who had a really traumatic experience and forced her to change her perspective on life, both personally and professionally. And she wrote a book this year called Presence. And I think that it's really important for people to read who are building their professional dashboard and thinking about their professional story, because it's all about confidence, and it's all about again, having the mindset, but also the physical approach to new situations, and how your body language really creates a dynamic, interesting, and positive experience. And so I think that would be a really interesting book to read as people are thinking about their dashboard and how they're coming across and trying to be more confident and using body language as a way to be more positive.
That's great.
Amy Cuddy.
Yeah, Amy Cuddy. I love it. Okay, and we'll actually have a link to the book in the show notes at thecareerq.com. Tom, this has been a great conversation.
Thank you.
I feel like we could talk for hours about this
Totally.
stuff. But ultimately, what it comes down to is empowering people to determine the level of engagement that they want to have, either as an existing employee or the future employee of another organization. So for the folks that are hearing you for the very first time, Tom, how can they find you?
So I just launched my new website, engagepursuit.com. That's the place to go to find all about me and my offerings. You can also sign up for my newsletter called The Pursuit, which is coming out every Tuesday. You can also email me. My address is tom@engagepursuit.com. I've got a Facebook page, LinkedIn, all the normal social media outlets, but the website's really the best place to find out more about me.
Oh, great. And we'll go ahead and post that information as well. Great. So until next time, Tom,
thank you.
We will become more engaged in our endeavors, and we'll talk to Tom again soon.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to head on over to thecareerq.com, where you can get more information, show notes, and related articles to today's topic. Also, if you like what you're hearing, head on over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a rating and a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again.
The Career Q podcast is produced by Lens Group Media and recorded at Jack Straw Cultural Center in the lovely Seattle, Washington.